and welcome to today's conversation with Donniel Hartman and Tamar Zandberg on the future of the left in Israeli society. My name is Jordana Amzel, and I serve as Director of Development for Israel Programs. This session is part of All Together Now, Jewish Ideas for This Moment from the Shalom Hartman Institute. The Shalom Hartman Institute is a pluralistic think tank and educational center for the Jewish people. We are excited to have more than 6,000 people registered for this month-long celebration of ideas. That includes more than 1,100 rabbis, 900 educators, and 700 Jewish community professionals. We are also hosting major learning programs for teens and college students. I'm happy to introduce Donniel Hartman, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, who will be in conversation with member of Knesset, Tamar Zandberg. Tamar is the former chairwoman of the Meretz Party. She is a social and feminist activist involved in issues of human rights, sustainable planning and urbanism, affordable housing and rent, natural resources, sustainable transportation, religious pluralism, women's rights issues, and cannabis decriminalization. She is a member of the Economic Affairs Committee, the Special Committee for the Rights of the Child, and the Committee on the Status of Women and Gender Equality of the Knesset. Their complete bios can be found on the Shalom Hartman Institute website. Without further ado, Tamar and Donniel.
Thank you, Jordana, and Tamar, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure in speaking to Jews from all over the world. Let's dive straight in. One of the interesting issues that I want to explore with you is, what does being on the political left ideologically mean? And I want to understand it, and then I want to begin to understand what place it has in Israeli society and where is it more prevalent in Israel, outside of Israel. But let's start with what does being a Zionist left mean to you?
Well, to put it short, it means being for all the good things, you know, obviously. No, but seriously, being a member of a small but a progressive and maybe the only left, like true sharp left-wing party in Israel, for us, many times we're asked, what does it mean? You know, sometimes in Israel, people expect the politics of flags. Do you raise the political flag or the economic flag or the pluralist flag, etc.? For us being left, it means all the flags rising up in the air together. It means fighting for peace, for the two-state solution. It means social justice and just allocation of the national resources. It means human rights and civil rights, including feminism, women's rights, LGBT, separation of state and religion, which is a huge issue in Israel, environmental justice, and truly wherever, I always say that our ideology stands on three legs: justice, equality, and democracy. And all three of them are struggling in Israel. So we had a lot of work, a lot of fighting to do, but I guess if our audience, most of it or some of it, come from the US right now, I guess in the last 4 years, you can understand better how our concept, our ideology is sometimes seems under attack, and we have to fight for it, and it's not taken for granted, even in the greatest democracy like the US.
Can I push you just a little bit? Because I want more specifics. Justice, equality, democracy, I can get 3/4 of the, maybe not, but maybe a lot of other parties to sign in for justice, equality, and democracy. Let's say, I hope, in theory.
Not necessarily, by the way. It depends on what, you know, some people call justice or democracy, and I guess it's like the authoritarian or the newspeak that we see in many places in the world, in the US and other places. Sometimes they use those terms and the language and the discourse of democracy to undermine what the basic foundations of democracy.
But it's correct. But the words themselves, at least, there might be a large spectrum of Israelis who agree that justice is important. Some form of equality, depends for whom, and democracy are at least fundamental values. could you, like there was this famous story about a convert coming to Hillel and saying to him, you know, I'm willing to convert, but there's too much stuff in Judaism. 613 commandments. I'm open to it, but tell me on one foot. Now, but I want to know so if you could pick today, for you personally, what do you think is the most significant issue with specifics? Not all the good things, because I'm with you, but what would be the most important thing that you say here, Tamar Zandberg, this is when I wake up in the morning, or what doesn't let me sleep at night, this is my principal issue.
I think the story about Rabbi Hillel is a very good one, because when he said all the Kol HaTorah al regel achat, everything on one foot, and he said ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. It means you have to love your neighbor or the other person like you love yourself. And like you said, this is something that everybody would agree to, right? But then when you walk into the details, you see that it means loving women like you love yourself, and you know that. The greatest democracy in the world, the United States of America, was first founded with an institution that does not include the voting right for women. And it means loving Black people and Palestinian people and Arab and LGBT and literally everybody. And that is something that, you know, the most basic concept of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that everybody would agree. All of the sudden, it gets not very taken for, not so, you know, given or not so taken for granted. And it's the same in Israel. Everybody would agree on the basic word democracy. It sounds good. Everybody would agree. But some would say that the rule of law all of a sudden does not apply when prime minister that is indicted in corruption is online. Or some people would suddenly say that the only principle of democracy is getting a majority of the Knesset, forgetting other very important principles of democracy, like protecting the rights of minorities, like putting the rule of law on the head of everybody, including a majority elected prime minister. So when you walk in the specifics, all of a sudden you see that it's not that of a consensus. In Israel, we are struggling on many of these issues right now. For example, corruption. And the issue of, 2 years back, it would be unthinkable for a democracy like Israel to have a prime minister who is indicted in such a severe corruption accusations. Many people thought that when Netanyahu would be indicted, he would quit 2 years back. And now he's fighting with a lot of voices in the new media, many supporters fighting for him to sit on his chair with severe corruption indictments. That's not.
So could we go back, like when we're now going to the next issue, which I'm happy to speak about, but would you then say that for you, the core definition of what it means to be a left is to expand hu re'acha, who is it that you're supposed to love as yourself? That the principle of the left is that this should be something that is as expansive and as exclusive as possible. Would that be your definition? Would that be the essential? And that could be both foreign policy, internal policy, economic policy. That would be the essence?
I think this is a core element, because when you try and put boundaries to who does it mean to love like yourself, some people would argue this is specific for Jews only, for even men or straight people or whatever. And I think the main idea of left is looking at a person as a person. Every human being around the world is entitled with rights. And we definitely want to expand the rights as much as possible, and to ensure the same rights to everybody, especially all Israelis. And in the context of our conversation, of course, there is a special status for Jewish people around the world who see themselves as have a certain zika, how do you say, connection, maybe?
Connection, relationship. Let's get to them in a moment. Let's get to them in a moment, but let's start with here. This ideal is beautiful. It's powerful. And also, by the way, I've said for many years, I've been noticing that the party that quotes Jewish values the most is Meretz. It's just like the one who says that so-called the Jewish state should be a state with Jewish values, you speak the language of Jewish values. So if this is there, where is it, or how do you understand the remarkable shrinking of the left in Israeli society? Probably 75% of North American Jews would vote for Meretz, or something close to that. In Israel,
that would give us a lot of strength. You guys have to come here.
That's okay. You could dream on, but that's okay. That's not happening. Even with Corona, I hate to disappoint. There's not going to be some massive. But in any event, but in Israeli society, it's shrunk. You had greater affinity in the past with labor. Now, as you said, there really is only one party, which is on the left. The other parties, they might share some of your ideology, but in their platforms, they never even talk about it. They try to they run under the platform that as neutral as I could be, maybe I'll get more voters. Maybe there might be someone who's a Bibi voter who might vote for me. You come out with this ideology, it's clear, but it's 3-4 seats. As a seasoned politician, that's not good. That's I don't want to call it a failure, but it's not a success. This is your framework to present who you are and what you stand for. But what mistakes do you believe the left has made in many ways to cause it to lose the majority of Israeli society?
Okay, so I want to tackle this question from two different angles. One is, I think that that we take what you're saying, and try to take it in, and say that it's true that the left is not as winning as definitely as not as we want it to be in Israel. And I think that something has happened in the last maybe 10 years in Israel, and I think some of you in the US, those of you who watch us from the US, can feel it also in the last years, and all of a sudden understand what we've been talking about all these years. And that is that it's not us, it's the right or the extreme or the populist right that has changed, not so much in its ideology, but in its discourse and in its way of expression, in the personality and nature of leaders who, and they all have in common many of the characteristics that search, the left as guilt, as those who are to blame for everything bad that is happening, to incite and to use, use the terms of betrayal versus patriotism or loyalty that is very strong and very emotional. And I think
those aren't mistakes that you made. You're describing. I want to push you harder. Like here, a cheshbon nefesh. Like, is there? Go.
I'm saying that I think there are two main reasons. One is, and we have to say, it's not up to us. I think many places in the world struggle with the same nature of politics right now. And I think, honestly, that none of us have a good answer. Before the Trump years, I remember we sometimes called for help or advice from our progressive friends around the world, and people came here from the Move On movement and etc., trying to teach us how you did it, in the US. And now, I don't think, we are in the same boat. And I think many places in the world can understand us better. The other not reason, but I think the other nature of that is unique here in Israel, if you look at this situation in the US, then the right and the left, so to speak, or the Republican and Democrats are in a way similar in size. And sometimes one gets the upper hand and then the other one gets the upper hand, and it's changing, and you have the swing states and the swing votes, etc. In Israel, there is a unique phenomenon, reality, in which many people share the values and the beliefs and ideology with us. It might sound strange, as you said, we are a 3, 4, 5 seat party, but the wider public support our values. But when they go to the ballot, they don't vote right, they vote center. The center is maybe a unique reality in Israel, in which people who share the same ideology like we do, like you said, they support the peace and democracy and equality and justice, the same definition we give to it, but they swing to the center, and then instead of the center turning left and forming a government, you have, look at the results of the last elections, for example. The anti-right, like we say, the center-left Arab bloc had 62 seats. This is a majority in the Israeli Knesset and in the Israeli public. A majority, not 3 seats, not 10, not 30, 62. But then a huge chunk of the center, unwilling to cooperate with the joint list, with the Arab representative of 20% of the Israeli Arab minority. Just have in mind the Ve'avta l'reacha kamocha, you know, who are the partners. Instead of being loyal to what their constituency, what their voters elect, went and joined with Netanyahu and the extreme right and the ultra-Orthodox. And now we have this government who, of course, wins a majority, but a big chunk of it were center, progressive, liberal voters.
But Tamar, I want to ask you, I want to push one more time, and I want to maybe refine the question. And I think your analysis is very interesting, and I'm with you. Is there something that you could have done differently? I know that, so the left ideology is betrayed by the center. They didn't want to sit with the Arabs. All of those reasons are there. But is there something that you're thinking now, you know, there'll probably be elections in 2021. Like it's coming. You know, maybe we'll wait a little longer, maybe 2022. But this national unity government has such mutual derision and hatred in it that there is no hine matovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. There isn't even what's havta l'reacha kamocha even in your own coalition. So there's going to be an election soon, or coming soon. In Israel, it's pretty safe to say that it's soon. What do you need to do differently? Right? What do you need to do differently? Because at the end of the day, the fact that around the world the left is losing, or the fact that Israelis connect to a center and then don't stick with the left, how do you grow to 10, 15 seats? Is it possible? Could you get to 20? Because look, you have Yesh Atid is getting up there, but you don't hear him make an ideological declaration on the issues that you're speaking about. So could you grow or not? Is maybe the problem your ideology? Is the ideology out of sync with Israeli society?
No, I don't think so. I think it's in the politics. It's not in the ideology. And I think that you are right that Yesh Atid, I call Yair Lapid, you know, a short time after the elections, Yair Lapid posted an article in Haaretz, kind of drawing his new way and saying and trying to define what center is. And he said, okay, in Israel, we sometimes laugh at the phrase extremists from both sides. You know, we have one violent incitement, racist side, and the other man-loving, rights fighting, equality and all of a sudden it's like they're both equal on the same equation. And I wrote an answering him, saying Yair Lapid, as the head of opposition, after what we've been through and after the lesson we've learned in the last 3 election campaigns in 1 year, you have a role. Your job is to turn to the left. Look at the left-wingers, look at the Arabs. You cannot do without them. And this is the lesson. You cannot, because otherwise it's either turn to the right and do what Gantz did, or turn to the left.
He's afraid that he'll lose his voters.
But
He doesn't think that staying with you will give him voters. So that's why I'm asking, what do we need to do?
But that's
What
the
does
thing.
the left have to do to change that environment?
So I think that that is wrong. I think that what we have to do is look inside and change our self-confidence, maybe, if you like. You know, I think that Lapid is all our lesson from the last three campaigns is that turning to the right does not give us votes, and in the end, you know, it loses elections. On the other hand, when you look at the true coalition, and yes, it will be with left-wingers like me. Yes, it will be with Arabs like the Joint List, and you cannot, you know, you cannot change the leadership of the Arab population. Some people say, okay, we are willing to cooperate with the 20% Arab population, but not with their leaders, because their leaders are so and so, and they speak in ways that we don't like. But you know, over 90% of the Arab minority in Israel elect these leaders, these representatives. That means that they represent their constituency, and you cannot do without them, because, you know, imagine taking the Democratic Party in the US and trying to win without the minorities. Only the white people, the Anglo-Saxon white people would vote. The right will rule forever. You know, that's even, you know, it's not moral to exclude such a
I'm with you. Now, let's shift a little bit, Tamar, to one of the issues which is now of tremendous concern for North American Jewry. Paradoxically, and I want to get into this, more concern amongst North American Jewry than I sense even amongst Israelis. And that has to do with annexation, hachalat ribonut, whatever you want to call it. I don't even know where we are, I don't know, recognizing our authority or whether annexing on Judea and Samaria. There is a very strong discourse now amongst progressive liberal Jews, which see the annexation as the end of the two-state solution. And there is no gradations. It's annexation of Area C is the same as annexation of Area A. Annexation of settlement blocks is the same, of Gush Etzion and Ma'ale Adumim, which would have in any way be, or it seems to be, they're going to be in the swaps, whatever they may be. The minute the word annexation is mentioned, there's a whole slew of things that are associated with the end of Israel as a democratic state, corruption, apartheid, all of the above. Could you give me what's your Torah? What's your take on and your attitude toward annexation? And do you make any distinctions between what is annexed and what is not annexed? And what's the fundamental problem or difficulty from your political and Jewish moral perspective? Mm-hmm. What's your Torah?
Okay, so first of all, I agree with you that I think this issue might be more upsetting or more interesting or meaningful to many around the world, Jewish communities and others, than in Israel. And actually it is scientific, because there was a public opinion poll about a month ago that revealed that only 3% of Israeli public care about this issue. Other 97% care about everything from, of course, coronavirus crisis, economic situation, etc. So it is very pushed aside from Israeli discourse. I think it's an obsession for a small layer of settlers lobby and the representatives in the government. Nevertheless, by the way, the same public opinion showed that the vast majority of 69% of Israelis oppose annexation, 63 of the Jewish population and 92 of the Arab population oppose and think it's not that they just don't support this move. I think it has a lot of dangers, and one of them, I never like to say end because I'm a politician and I always believe in change, but so it's never too late, you know, in my opinion. But of course, it's a huge, huge obstacle for the two-state solution, and you know, it's a clear risk of violence. It's a danger to our peace treaty with Jordan, to our relationship in the Middle East with the Arab world. It puts us in danger of international sanctions, of losing the support of the Democrats in the US, many, many dangers. But I think the main one, and the one that is most stressful and harmful and a danger to me, is the character, the nature of Israel. And a huge threat to democracy and a danger of apartheid. And I know this is a word, you know, in American English, the A word, you sometimes don't like even to say this word, but how else,
You know,
but how else would you call a legal system and a regime and sovereignty that has two kinds of populations that are being classified by race or by ethnicity or by nationality, that one has rights, including the very basic political rights of voting, and the other one is nothing. It's just, you know, it's not even a citizen, it's not allowed to vote, and is being ruled by a government and by a regime that they're not allowed, that they're
that's not changing through annexation, Tamar. You're speaking about whether the ongoing reality of occupation is not creating, in essence, without a peace process or an aspiration for it to come to an end, something can't be perceived as temporary when no one's trying to move the status, when the status quo is permanent. And then you're saying, what's happening when there are 4, 5, 6 million people who are between the Jordan and the river who don't have the same legal status? The annexation doesn't change that reality.
Well, I think that in politics, yes, there is a difference between de facto and de jure. You know, there is a difference whether you at least have the self-perception of temporary and the message to your citizens and to the world that you're moving
Correct.
forward negotiation to end this situation, or you declare the Kulei Alma, you know, you declare to everybody, your citizens and the world, the family of democracies that you want to be part of, and that Israel was founded as a member of the family of democracies, that you openly declare that your face is not to negotiation anymore, is not to solve this conflict, but to make it a reality forever.
And you think annexation of Area C does that? I'm not talking annexation of Area A and B. In other words, I make, again, this is not about me, but it's very often I believe that the bigger problem is the fact that we're not engaged in a peace process. Annexation of Area C is less of the challenge. And so, and as you said, most Israelis, they don't care about it. But for most of them, the issues are that this is just simply stupid. Those who care about it on the right are petrified because it at least in theory, might accept a Palestinian state. But the vast other majority speak as you just get. You gave a list of why it's dangerous. The dangers are there. But is there, in North America, this is defined as a moral tipping point, as a moral game changer. And I'm trying to understand, in Israel, it's not talked that way. And even in your remarks, it's the occupation is talked that way, but the ongoing reality is what's morally troubling. But the annexation of Area C, does that change the moral equation of Israeli society in your mind?
Yes, it does. And I think that, like you said, the difference between ongoing and the tipping point is exactly the tipping point. I mean, the tipping point does not change from a great reality to a disaster, but it changes down the slippery slope to the point of maybe no return. As I said, I don't like to use these terminate words because I'm a politician and I believe in change always. But yes, I think annexation is a tipping point. It is a fundamental change in the way Israel perceives itself and in the way it perceives its citizens and its place in the world. And I think that Area C, yes, I hear this discourse about small annexation versus big annexation and how small the annexation is going to be. By the way, Area C is a huge annexation because Area C is 40% of the entire West Bank and Jordan Valley. And it's like you said, if we're talking about the end to the two-state solution, this is half the land for future Palestine. And also it is very, again, we don't like the equation to South Africa and to the apartheid, but the Bantustans are in South Africa are exactly what will happen if Area C will be annexed, because the small territories that are separated from each other and do not create the territorial continuum is exactly how Israel wants to stack its presence, and let's remind everybody, military presence that will be much, much harder to secure once you are, you have soldiers and tanks and checkpoints all around the West Bank and tear it apart, not allowing the Palestinians to have their own sovereignty, their own right of self-determination. And this is something I think as Zionists, my grandparents came here in the 30s and 40s, and they followed the Zionist dream that the Jews would have their own self-determination in their own independent state of Israel. And it's unthinkable for me as their granddaughter to think that once we got that right from the UN, from the family of nations, we will be the ones preventing the same right from another people that sharing our land.
So let's dig in on that a little for a moment, because the left in Israel clearly defines itself as Zionist. But the more extreme left in North America is now wondering whether that term is a healthy term. I remember I was once defining, because the Hartman Institute, we're a Zionist institution, and I call myself a Zionist, and a student raised her hand and she says, Rabbi Hartman, could you just not use that term? Because whenever you use that term, I feel I can't be in here because you're whitewashing occupation or whatever else it might be. Now, it's a term that as you were speaking, your face was lighting up. You're speaking about your grandparents. You're speaking about your neshama. Now, could you? You could see it's something like all of a sudden this is critical. What does Zionism mean for you?
Yes, I think this is a very good point, and of course I'm aware of that conversation, and that is what is most harmful for us and painful, to think that what is defining for us, what is part of our very personal and national and collective history and identity, because of occupation, is all of a sudden being totally assimilated or is not separated from the wrongdoing that us as Israelis are responsible for. And I think this is maybe the most, the biggest damage that occupation has to, besides what it does for Palestinians, of course, but that it has
what it does to your Zionism. But then could you give me your definition of Zionism? What does it mean for you?
Zionism is very simply the homeland of the Jewish people, is the movement that is responsible for the homeland for the Jewish people. Is the one that saved, my personal family from a tragic history. Once I asked my grandmother, how was it for her to come here, leave everything behind, learn a new language. She came before the state was even established, so she didn't even know what would end up with the place she's coming to. And she said, let me tell you what happened to my sister and 3 brothers who didn't do the same, who stayed in Europe. And we raised, she said, I raised my family here, and I have you as your as my granddaughter, and we started a whole new chain of Jewish life in Israel in independence, and hopefully we'll never have to be prosecuted and chased like the Jews were for centuries and thousands of years. So this homeland is now for me and for my daughters is something taken for granted, and it's good that it is so. But the only shadow over it is the wrongdoing we are responsible towards someone else. And this is why the reason, the basic reason, besides all the other dangers and the danger of violence it puts us in, and the economic price and everything, I think that a homeland for my people is the right thing to do, is justice. And I want the same for the people who share the same land with us.
Got it. Let's shift gears for a moment. And you had mentioned at the beginning that one of the critical issues for you is our issues of state and religion. Let's leave aside the external borders for a second, or the re'acha, your neighbor, how does that assume people outside of the Jewish community? And let's start talking about love your neighbor as yourself within the context of state and religion within Israel. And one of the key features, as we all know, is that Judaism, less than it unites us, divides us. We're not united by our Judaism. But at the same time, we have the greatest shared enterprise in Jewish history of trying to build, as you said, a homeland for the Jewish people. So how do you envision an ideal structure for state and religion? And let me even push it a little more. Is it the American model of a wall of separation, a Jeffersonian wall of separation between church and state, or state and religion? Or do you envision that in the homeland of the Jewish people, you need something else? How should religion and state, or in particular Judaism, because the only group that doesn't really have religious freedom in Israel are Jews. That's the only group, and also secular Christians also have a problem, because they have to still go to. But leave them aside. What is your, beyond the platform? What's your vision of what a Jewish homeland looks like?
Yeah, I think that this is a very touchy point and a good question, because, when I travel, and I don't remember when was the last time we did it, and maybe when will be the next time we'll be able to do it, but my recollection of traveling to Jewish around the world, and especially North America, I find myself struck and even envy with the richness of Jewish life and the variety of different identities and different cultures, and what does it mean? And every synagogue and every Jewish community and every congregation has its own, habits and its own norms and all of them under the big tent of Judaism. And when you come to Israel, you narrow your identity so much that you're either ultra-Orthodox and you're a supporter of the Rabbanut, or you're secular and you're against it. And the conservative people and the ones who practice Judaism in different ways and in not very categoric, ultra-Orthodox or secular, are very small and marginal and not institutionalized, like in the Jewish communities in the US. And I think that this is something that is one of the reasons, and maybe a main reason, is because the ultra-Orthodoxy was granted the mandate to state who is Jewish, what does it mean to be Jewish, how would the synagogue look like, how would you marry and divorce and be buried, and also the fact that you will not be able to ride public transportation on Shabbat, and many other forbids and bans that are strange and that are foreign to most Jewish Israelis, and that created distance, and that created a way of most of us look at Judaism as something very, very distant and remote, and don't want to engage in it because it is a place of compulsory, the place of people very, very similar from us. And I think that my model, being a homeland for the Jewish people, and as I said earlier, that is my definition of Jewish and democratic. It does not mean halacha state. It does not mean being Iran. It does not mean, Israel is the only democracy in the world in which the homeland of the Jewish people is the only place where Jews cannot get married and divorced by their own choice and by their own belief. And is the
So
only.
what should it be? So what should it be? Are you for getting rid of the rabbinate, having multiple rabbinates? Um, what part of Shabbat? Where does Judaism enter into the public sphere? Where does it not enter into the public sphere?
I support a model of separation, of having a civil, democratic public space and governmental, habits, and living religion to not just the private families, but also the communities. For example, I have a 5-month-old baby, and thank you. And when she was born, we went to a ceremony in Keilat Beyachad, which is a liberal community here in Center Tel Aviv, and it was beautiful. It's not that men and women are not separated from each other. It's an LGBT-friendly community, and this is a place where I can find myself in a community and a congregation that is in accordance with my values. I, by the way, totally support governmental support for these institutions. Because it gives an answer to a basic need of many Jews in Israel. And
it's not a wall of separation. It's actually, you don't want to separate, church and state. You just don't want the state, the establishment clause of the First Amendment, that the state shall not establish a church or establish a particular denomination. So you would have the state funding, but funding almost anybody's expression of Jewish life according to the interests of their community.
Yes, I support the wall of separation in the way that in the meaning that it will not be that governmental regulations will be defined by the Jewish, for example, marriage, divorce, burial, etc. I do the same way that the state gives money, funding to matnas, to after
JCCs.
Yes, same way. I think that for sure it should, because otherwise it's private. I know that in Israel everything is much less privatized than in the US. The same way health is being governmentally funded. The same way religion, which I think the freedom of religion is a human right. And I'm saying that as an atheist, as a secular woman, but it is a human right for those who practice, and it doesn't matter any kind of religion and any kind of Jewish stream, but the compulsory way that ultra-Orthodox Judaism in Israel has the key to everything that is Jewish is harmful for starting from the right to get married, going through the Jewish, life and culture that is severely hurt by it.
Let me then ask, because this was something that upset me very deeply, and I know upset me as an Israeli and upset North American Jews very much. The Kotel was going to be divided.
Yeah.
And it was going to be like, here it was, we don't want a wall of separation. Everybody's going to have their place. It was your dream. Everybody, just like you have in Yachad or Reform shuls or conservative shuls or egalitarian Orthodox, everybody would have their community. The state supports everybody. Here it was. The state was going to support a kotel for everybody. And we thought there was only a little bit of a kotel. It turns out there was more kotel. It's like the miracle of Hanukkah. One little candle. Now, oops, we thought there wasn't. Now there is. There's a whole bunch of kotel. There's enough for everybody. Everybody's happy. Naftali Bennett from the Religious Zionist advocated this very, very deeply and pushed for it as a sense of responsibility for world Jewry. And here he said, this is at the end, he didn't continue. Netanyahu pushes for it. The ultra-Orthodox, the second time around, pushed, and everybody disappeared. And when we went out to demonstrate, guess who wasn't with us, Tamar? I'm not saying you personally, but the Israeli left, the secular, they couldn't be bothered to come out at all. It was 200, 400 liberal Jews in Jerusalem, ranging, by the way, from liberal religious, most were liberal religious Zionists to conservative reform. The secular Israeli wasn't there. So to fight for the Israel you want, the Kotel wasn't just a North American agenda. This was the Israel. Imagine if you had a Kotel for yourself to go to have a ceremony for your daughter. So here it was right there. Where are all the secular Israelis who are saying, you know what, I'm for religious freedom, they weren't there. And North American Jews were left alone. What does that say? Or what does it say about what the left really cares about? Is this really an issue for the left? Not for you personally, I believe you. But is it their issue? Because it seems that politically, that's not their issue.
Yes, I think you are right. And I must say that I think this is a blind spot for many of Israeli left and Israeli secular people. And I think this is an outcome of the 70 years of what Judaism is and what role it plays in the lives of most Israelis, so to speak. And I do think that the American Jews and the American Jews communities in Israel, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in some small places in Israel were left alone on this issue, and not rightly so. I think you're totally right. You know, I was the first one with very few women, members of Knesset, who joined the Women of the Wall when they started to get arrested by the police. And up until now, you know, Yehuda Glick, a former right-winger Knesset member, visited my office this week, and he saw the talit and the kippah of Women of the Wall that I have in my office, that I keep it since 7 years ago. That I went with Anat Hoffman and Leslie Sachs and all the friends of Women of the Wall and helped them when they were arrested by the police for praying their own belief. And I always said, you know, I'm secular and I'm not religious. I don't pray. I don't visit the Kotel. I'm not even Reform, you know. But I went with them in a sign of solidarity and of support. And I think you are totally right. And I surely take the responsibility as one of the leaders of the left that we weren't enough there for this issue. And I think that the main reason is that the growing distance that the situation of being, you know, the ultra-Orthodox monopoly has put us in a way that we kind of forgot or left or stopped connecting on this issue.
One of the most beautiful things about Zoom lectures, by the way, is I hear your baby.
Yeah.
And that's not noise. It's beautiful. That's like we're not lecture. We're people, and we're lecturing with the totality.
Yes, we're visiting.
It's very beautiful. You're not Tamar Zandberg. You're Sanat Zandberg, the mommy. So kol hakavod. But last question. Here it is. As we're bringing this to a close, a lot of North American Jews, most North American Jews love Israel, care about Israel, and want to have a relationship with Israel. It's getting harder and harder for them. Your Zionism is meaningful for somebody who lives in Israel. It's not as meaningful. They might support the right of Tamar Zandberg to have a state. But for them, they're at home. They're not in Galut. They're at home in America and Canada. And policies such as Kotel or occupation or annexation or wherever it might be are making it harder for them. And certain political movements now in America, which are expanding the Ahavta l'reacha kamocha in America, Me Too and Black Lives Matter, are asking, here, what are our responsibilities to all human beings? And they don't necessarily feel Israel reflecting that to the same degree. Here it is. There's hundreds of rabbis here, lay people, what tens of, maybe hundreds of thousands of people might be hearing in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in their Zoom shuls. What do you have to say to half the Jewish people who don't live to Israel? On behalf of Israel, on behalf of them, what's the relationship that you would like? What's the invitation? What would you tell them why not to give up on you?
Yes, I think this is a very good point, and I think that many North Americans in the last 4 years can now understand what it feels like for us to love your country and not necessarily support its government or all its policies. And I invite you to relate and cooperate with us, with those Israelis who share and those Jews who share the same values with you. We are the Me Too and the Black Lives Matter and the progressive movement of Israel. And there is such a movement, there is such a camp, it exists. It might be smaller, it might be a little bit bigger, I don't know, but for sure it shares the same values. And yes, the fact that we as Israelis are part of the progressive movement here, it means that there is no contradiction between expanding the kamocha for Black people, for LGBT, for women, for everybody, and at the same time having a spot in your heart for Israel, for the homeland of your people. It doesn't mean, you know, your home is wherever you choose. Whether my home is Israel, your home is North America, which is totally fine. I will not urge you to come here or not come, or I mean, do whatever you
can
like.
urge them, but won't
Free,
help.
you know,
It's free.
totally fine. But I relate to you as a Jew, as Jewish, you know, as part of my people. And I don't think that the fact that Israel now has another government that we oppose, that we don't vote to and we don't support, means we are not part of it, of the country, of the people, of what we like about it, and we don't fight to change it. And I think in that respect, we have a lot in common. And we are both part of the same global fight. And also, we are both part of this specific fight for these values in our people and in our Israel. So I invite you not to disengage, on the contrary, to engage in that conversation. And I'm at your disposal for if you want to share. And this is why I love this conversation so much, because I see my counterparts all over the world, and it gives me strength. And I'm also willing to give back this strength back to you.
Tamar, thank you very, very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Kol hakavod. Be well. Thank you.
You. Thank you.
Bye, Lato.